So today our topic for discussion will be civil society organization and pressure groups. Why these are important? We have seen in last few years that UPSC has constantly asked questions on these topics in the GS2 syllabus, and from the point of view of optional, public administration also contains this topic. So now let's get started without wasting time. So first we should know what civil society organizations are, why the CSOs came into being, what are the histories, definitions, the features, functioning, criticism, and conclusion. Before I begin the lecture, let's we go back to our school and college days. Now, for example, if you wanted a teacher who was not up to the mark and you wanted her to be removed from the taking classes, and if you individually approach the headmaster or the principal, would she agree? No. But if you took help for of more than 50% of the class, and you made had appealed by writing letters or by approaching her directly, she would at least consider your request, if not remove the teacher at all. So this is how the civil society works. It works on an agenda which is common to each and every individual who come together to fight for a cause. Now, why civil society organizations came into being? Let's go back to the history. In the Industrial Revolution, there were changes in the political and economic structure. Polit- how see in the political structure earlier we had dictatorship. The kings ruled the countries or the continents, and they were replaced by democracy. Especially, we have seen this in the French Revolution, where the monarchy was replaced by democracy. Initially, the National Assembly came into being, and finally, their assembly was introduced. Secondly, the economic mercantilism and feudalism. As you know, that British has come to India as a mercantile, and then they started trading. But later on, they started capturing power. But so that model now was replaced because of the industrial revolution by capitalism. Here, the person who has a lot of capital would invest the money, and there will be people who will be working for him. Now, slowly, these two dominant powers came into being. One was the government and the capitalists. The government, in the form of representative government, for example, even in our parliament, we elect our representatives in the form of members of parliament during general elections, and these are the people we suppose will take welfare approach and work for the welfare maximization of the people by taking decisions accordingly. Now the markets were there for producing goods and services which people can avail, and all the both these organizations, like, they were influential and they gathered a lot of power. People used to respect them. So these two organizations had a lot of power. Now, so why? So then these were respected earlier for welfare and rationality. Later they became exploitative. Okay, so, and you know that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Since they did not had any check and balances, they became exploitative. You know how the British or the colonial government exploited people. So, our post-industrial revolution, a lot of colonies were formed, and they became exploitative. Similarly, uh, even the uh, even the industries, the markets, were transformed into monopolies and oligopolies. For example, the East India Company that formed a monopoly over the trade, and it was exploitative. You know how it ruined the artisans, how it ruined general people and the farmers. So now the people came together against this exploitation, as you can see in our national movement or even in the social religious movement. They came together against exploitation to fight for it. Now, so this is just the background of it. Now we look at the actual history of the modern forms of these civil society organizations. So, as we have discussed earlier, in Europe, the French Revolution was the beginning of civil society organizations, and you know that the entire revolution that was carried out by the civil society itself to transform monarchy into democracy. Even in the world wars, a lot of organizations, civil society movements came together. For example, the Bolshevik Revolution, that was again a civil society organization initially, and then they took turns into a political organization. Similarly, you can see that in the world over, there were similar protests by women organizations for voting rights and on so on. I know why people were protesting, because they were not concerned about any of these wars, and they knew that they were imperial wars. So came together against their own government to fight for their causes. And in India, we know the social religious reform movements took over. For example, Raman Roy, who is the first modern man of India, he initiated the Brahma Samaj, and then we also had Anand Arya Samaj by Swami Dayanand Saraswati, then Ishwarchand Vidyasagar and Dr. Ambedkar and Periyar and so on. They all led civil society movements for one cause or the other. The social reforms are mostly focused on untouchability, women emancipation. Okay. Now post 1950s, they were like the organizations were very active because they had a colonial power who was ruling the country with an iron fist. But post 1950s, people thought that since the the freedom fighters themselves have come into power, so these activities got restricted to very specific activities like health and education, because the government commanded respect, and missionaries like Christian missionaries, RK Mission, these were very dominant during that time, and they focus only on health and education. Now we go back to 1960s again. The failure of government, you can see in 1960s, the agriculture failed, that led to the green revolution later on, and even the planning failed. We had war, everything, and even land ceiling acts also failed. Zamindars in the party did not allow, because of most of the dominant parties had Zamindars as elected representatives. They did not allow the land ceiling movements to prosper. And in West Bengal, that led to student protests by Kanu Sanyal and Charu Mazumdar, and later led to Naxalism also. And when you go back to 1970s, you see corruption taking over. People are becoming more poorer, and even in Gujarat, you can see the civil society started off with the students where they came together to protest against the bad quality of food that was served in the hostels. And later on, JP movement, Jayaprakash Narayan took over from them, and the famous JP movement, then was spearheaded by him, and the government was dissolved in Gujarat. And later on, this transformed into Sampurn Kranti, and in 1974, we all know it led to the emergency. In 1980s, there were very different reasons why the civil society came into being, and they fought for very different kind of, they have different motives to start the movement. For example, the Ramjan Bhumi movement by VHP, RSS, and BJP, and regional parties also started getting more autonomy during this time. For example, in Assam, the Assam Student Union participation and autonomy for the Assamese. This movement led to a lot of uproar in the Assam region, and this local political party became very dominant later on. And Praful Kumar Mahantu became the chief minister. In Punjab, you know how Bhindranwala took over the civil society movement, which was very violent, and that goes against even the constitution article 191A, that you can only gather 191A and B, that you can gather or form associations for peaceful meanings. But Bhindranwala took it on a different level. He created a secessionist movement to form Khalistan and started ethnic cleansing, which later led to the Blue Star, Operation Blue Star. We know all about that. And in 1980s, again, you see the Kanchiram coming up with Dalit movement. Bahujan Samaj Party was formed. And even we see a very good thing that the PILs were started after Justice Bhagwati took over the cause suo moto. Now coming to 1990s, because of the LPG revolution, the reforms that took place, the liberalization, privatization, and globalization, there was a rapid expansion in all the activities of civil society. Minority rights, children rights, women rights, SC, STs, and OBCs, all they started gathering pace, and even the Mandal rights started because of the OBC reservation that was announced by the government. 2000s, there was growing dissatisfaction, and we can see that civil society organization like Mazdoor Kisan Sabha Samiti, Sangharsh Samiti, led to the formation of RTI later on, and India Against Corruption led the movement with the help of Anna Hazare against to formalize Lokpal. Okay. And now we can see that India has become one of the countries that has the largest number of NGOs anywhere in the world. Okay. Now, the recent government has also been controlling them through FCRN and FEMA, etc. Now, let's see what the definition of a civil society is. According to World Bank, civil society refers to a wide array of organizations, community groups, non-governmental organizations, labor unions, indigenous groups, charitable organizations, faith-based organizations, professional associations, and other foundations. So we have seen that the Brahmo Samaj and the Dalit movements and other such kind of NGOs, the RSS, so all these are forms of civil society. Simplified version would be that when two or more people come together and fight for a common cause, civil society organizations are formed. Now the features. So what are the features? One, they are not part of either government or market. For example, NGOs, pressure groups, community-based organizations, religious organizations, social audit committees, caste-based organizations, and other voluntary associations like ISKCON, FICCI, CII, Lokniti, etc. So they are not part of the government. They stay out of the government, but they try to influence the government directly or indirectly. We will see how they influence the governments. They have a common cause. For example, recently we have seen this student protest against RRB NTPC recruitment that took place that also turned very violent. So all they had a common cause that they wanted reforms in the recruitment, they wanted changes in results, and they wanted to make government accountable. They're not for profit and welfare of people. So if you see, all these organizations are either registered under Section 8 of the Companies Act, which is for not profit, or they are registered as a trust. Okay, so these are the forms which they take, where the expenditures and the revenues both are like neutralized, so that they do not retain any profit. And you can see the entry and exit voluntary. So you can be part of any NGO, work voluntarily, and come out of it. You do not have to be uh, tied to any contract or anything. Unlike the formal organizations where you have a contract and you work on wages or payments regularly, that is not there. Okay, they do hire experts, but that is a different thing. Most of the organizations are run on voluntary groups. For example, if we take off uh, the Akshay Patra Foundation, okay, and Lok Niti, they are voluntary organizations. Another feature is that they bridge gap between government and people. So they highlight issues like corruption. When people are not aware what is going on between in the government, and even the government is not aware what people actually want. So this there is a big gap. So if you look into the policy terms, because of this gap, the policies are also not formulated according to the wishes of people. For example, recently the three farm laws. Okay, there was a gap between what the people wanted and what the government delivered, because of which finally the government had to roll back the schemes. Had the civil society been active from initial phase of policy formulation, inputs and creation, we could have the government could have been able to implement this very successfully. So that is how they impact the policies. We have seen Bharatiya Kisan Union, how they fought for a cause, and the government had to roll back their policy. They create awareness amongst people about the rights, make governments accountable. Again, we've seen that how in the recently Hathras case or cow vigilantism, how people were made aware about their rights, and then government was made accountable to act against people who were creating violence. Okay, and even there were laws after the Nirbhaya case that were enacted all because of the civil society movement. They transformed the democracy from representative to participatory. So what does that mean? Right now, when we elect a person, he's elected for 5 years, and then you do not have any control over him. But through civil society, you can ensure that your voices are heard, just like the Kisan Andolan made their voice heard, and make the make the representatives that we have elected accountable, the executive accountable, and take necessary steps. Okay, the definition we have also already taken. Now we come to a topic called pressure groups. Pressure groups are nothing but the same. Again, they are also informal organizations. Here also people, two or more people come together through various means to pressure the government to get their demands met. Why? Because in democracy, we've already discussed this in the starting of this lecture, that democracy is about majority. When more than 50% of the class will sign or go to the principal, they might take action. Voice of a single person is never heard in democracy. That's why you need numbers on the ground. The pressure groups had their origin in USA, okay, where different sections of the people demand different things. So in USA, you have the white community, the black community, the industry, and the immigrants. So each and every section will demand different things from the government. They form a lobby, which are also legal, and the demand put their demands in front of the government, and they can also pay money also to the elected government openly. So now we see the linkage to public policy. Okay, if you see that there is a group model in public policy where different groups, okay, different groups like the agriculture, for example, Bharatiya Kisan Union, the industry, the FICCI, for environment, we are Center for Science and Environment. So such other groups are formed. They all give their inputs to the policy formulation, implementation, evaluation, and then review. So in India, you can see the pressure groups. Again, those are also part of civil society. The social religious movement that took place in India, they can also be seen as part of pressure groups. Okay, the first reservation in Madras Presidency was passed in India because of the pressure groups, because of the anti-Brahmin agitations. Even in Constituent Assembly, various groups came to influence it. Trade organizations, caste-based organizations, all came together, and in the Constituent Assembly, they had put their points forward, and now we see how varied our constitution is. One of the lengthiest constitution because everyone wanted a peace in the new republic, and they could influence that through their pressure groups in the Constituent Assembly. So how these pressure groups or the civil society organizations work? I told you that we will discuss this later on. So one is that getting their representatives elected. For example, uh, this is a typical example. You can see that RSS is a pressure group or a civil society. Then it has a political wing, and people fight elections and get their political representatives elected. Similarly, other such organizations are also present, which directly or indirectly get their representatives. Even the Kanchiram movement for Dalits started as a civil society organization, and later on BSP was formed. So this is how it works. Another is petitions and prayers. For example, recently you've seen how the UPSC students are protesting for extra attempt. Other students are also requesting for extra attempt. So how? They were writing petitions, they were prayers on Twitter campaigns, social media influencers, all they came together to pressure the government. Another is the creating awareness among masses. We've seen how different NGOs, civil societies come together, even social media or through through protests or through petitions, they create awareness amongst people. Another is lobbying that we have discussed just now, that in USA they get the representatives elected and then they can also pay money for favoritism. Then we have people's movement. People movement could be the Bandh rallies like Andolan. They were also called Andolan GVs. So all these can be organized by civil society organizations to influence the policies. Now they have certain criticisms against them. For example, they are demanding transparency and accountability, but themselves are not transparent and accountable. You've seen how in Bihar shelter homes our, our children, girls were molested. So there was no transparency and accountability until the social audit committees highlighted, again a civil society highlighted the problems in the another civil society, but they want others to be accountable. They have vested interests like foreign funding to stop development. For example, Greenpeace, Compassion International, they were banned in India because they got foreign funds to stall governmental projects or development projects in India. They called five-star activities and spreading misinformation to people. Okay, for example, they would start a jive suit book ke sarkar. They will say that they are mostly working for the corporates and not you. Agitation would start. How we see now Andolan. The project that could have been completed decades back, that was stalled for long. And now when it's completed, people are reaping the benefits. Instruments like blackmailing and violence now in farmers violence, the RRB violence. So and even earlier in Mandal Commission, students like ignited themselves. So all these tricks are used. Demand to damage to parliamentary democracy. When they are on streets, it is often criticized that the actual parliamentary democracy, the laws, rules, and regulations should be created in parliament. Now they have come to streets and they want negotiations also on the streets. Everything decisions should be made on streets. So that is how it is damaging to the parliament and parliamentary democracy. So let's conclude it. Is it true that these organizations are bad? So it's not completely true because we've seen in 2008 and 9 when policy paralysis was there, the opposition judiciary couldn't stop the corruption. It was a civil society organization later on by Anna Hazare and others that took up the cause. When we have seen the NGOs work in COVID times, the migrant crisis, they help people, they help each other come out. Even the government took help of these NGOs and even taking care of implementation in many of the policies. For example, in Swachh Bharat Mission, we have Sulabh International that is working very fantastically. Okay, and even the chronic capitalism, you can see that there is a collusion between the markets and the government. At that time, the civil society organizations lead a movement, and you can see that consumer acts were passed, the RTI Act was passed, that highlighted a lot of corruption and also made reforms. For example, in the telecom sector, the 2G scam, in the coal sector, the coal scam, that all led to transparency. And but when we see that whenever there is a gap in the administration or the judiciary, when that gap is created, that is filled by the civil society organizations. But when from 2014 onwards, you have seen that single party rule has come up, and NGOs have become less and less relevant. People are more aware of their rights also, and secondly, the government is also taking decisions very fast, implementing the policies. and that is why people are more dependent on like believing in the government more than the civil society. So we are seeing a lot lesser uh, amount of civil society organization movements until these farmers agitations. That was a different scenario altogether. And the government is also now trying to tackle the menace of bad and good NGOs by FCRA regulations. And even the Lokpal Act has included them under them so that they can be better regulated. So, and also we can see that the credibility of all the NGOs is only there until they are performing and working selflessly for the people. It is the people who make them more authentic. Okay. Now come to let's conclude it finally. So the second answer what it suggests is that government should take measures to strengthen them because they bridge gap between people and the government. And even in the new public administration that where we are talking about privatization, globalization, they become very important because each and every government has to work with them to solve real problems. So they must be consulted. So directly or indirectly, when the people are getting consulted. Okay. So this is how. So we have to create a delicate balance, and we should all come together to let these good NGOs work for the betterment of the society. That's it.